Hello everyone. My name is Ed Potu. I'm the
Good,
Chief
good.
Operating Officer here
Good.
at My Financial Coach. We're very lucky today to have Dr. Laffer with us to give us his economic outlook for 2025. And what we'd like to have everyone in the meeting know is that you are currently muted and there will not be any unmuting throughout the event. However, we do encourage all of our participants to ask questions in the chat as we go through the event. We're going to have a Q&A session towards the end. I will read a few questions, and hopefully Dr. Laffer will be able to share his insights. However, before we get to that, I'd like to present Bill McDonald, our CEO, who has an overview of actually what we do here at My Financial Coach for those individuals who've not had the pleasure of working with us either directly or indirectly in the past. Bill, over to you.
So My Financial Coach was established about 5 years ago with myself, Dr. Laffer, and a like-minded investor group that wanted to bring comprehensive, unbiased, and unconflicted financial planning to people. Rather than most financial planners lead with products and services, we lead basically with the comprehensive planning. Our CFPs are all salaried employees. They don't sell any products or services. They provide comprehensive planning. So if you think about financial planning, again, people say, I have a financial planner, and that's on the left-hand side. That might be a wealth manager at a brokerage firm, or it might be a very competent insurance agent. But what are they doing? They're spending about 15% of their time on quote unquote planning, and the balance of their time, they're leading with their product. You can't be an expert in everything. I mean, you don't have a heart surgeon who also is a cancer specialist, who also is an orthopedic surgeon. You need specialists in different areas. On the right side, at My Financial Coach, what we do is the comprehensive planning. We touch on all of these subjects and in some depth, but not the depth of a specialist. And that's where we bring in our subject matter experts or work with people that you currently have. So we look at all the elements from estate planning to retirement planning, investment management, all the way through tax planning, et cetera. And then when the heavy lifting of the solutions come in, we work with our subject matter experts. So the first thing we do is we bring in our CFP. We assign each person their own certified financial planner. This is not a call center. We have a technology platform that's very secure, so we upload your entire net worth in one place. So you have an opportunity to review your employer benefits all the way through to your assets and liabilities. And then you work with the CFP who does the comprehensive planning. So when you think about financial planning, it really takes a team to put together a comprehensive financial plan and to coordinate everything. I talk to a lot of people and they say, well, I have a financial planner. That person might be a wealth manager. They might be with a brokerage firm and they might be managing their money. But do they have an attorney? Do they have a bank trust officer? Do they have a CPA? Do they have an insurance agent? Who's handling the property and casualty? And then who's coordinating all of this? Who's bringing these pieces together? So My Financial Coach sits in the middle here. We do the planning, we do the coordinating, and then we work with the advisor that you have, or if you've outgrown that advisor, we bring in our subject matter experts. So we've sought out people around the country with expertise in all of these areas that could bring good comprehensive planning, but out of the box thinking, helping to coordinate your efforts through our coordination as a team. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arthur Laffer, and probably the reason that you've attended today's webinar.
I just love the company and I think it's wonderful, and what you're doing is a great service, and I just fantastic. And what I'd like to do right now is give a brief overview of what I think is going to happen with the Trump election, with the Trump takeover in Washington, D.C. It's been quite shocking. I was in Mar-a-Lago on election night. I was there for dinner, started at 6 o'clock, and I was able to leave by 10 o'clock assured of the victory. I got out of there. 4 hours for dinner is about as long as I can take. I was there with only 520 of his closest friends. That was that night. And then I was in the inauguration event in Washington, D.C. And it's sort of exciting watching Trump come in because he's a very different president than he was before. What I'd like to do is talk about economic policies and only economic policies, literally, and juxtapose the first term, his first term with his second term. And I'm going to do it in the five kingdoms of macroeconomics, which is taxation, government spending, monetary policy, inflation, sound money, and also then on regulations and trade. And if you look at him during the first term, and very honestly, I'm an economist. I don't talk about social issues. I don't really think much about them either, to be honest with you. I don't think about a lot of other issues as well. I'm really into economics, though. And if you look at the standpoint of economics in his first term, I think Trump single-handedly was the best first-term president the U.S. has ever had. And I'll go through that with you. I mean, on the tax side, he had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was a phenomenally good policy. He did not make a lot of the beginning mistakes that most presidents make. Ronald Reagan phased in the tax cuts, and as you know, if you know there's going to be a tax cut next year, what do you do this year? You defer all the income you possibly can into next year, and it caused the 81, 82 recession. Trump did not make that mistake of phasing in the tax cuts, and we had a very major cut. I mean, the highest marginal income tax rate, I think, went from 35% to 21%. We cut the corporate rate. I've cut the personal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37%. We had a bunch of pass-throughs. We reduced the death tax substantially. And one of the biggest ones was 100% expensing of capital purchases. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act really did fire the economy up amazingly. They paid for themselves, the lowest poverty rates. Our growth rate was really substantial during that period until COVID-19 hit. Once COVID-19 hit, he did one of the most amazing things ever. He developed a vaccine. It was called Operation Warp Speed. He was able to develop a vaccine in 10 months, which they were expecting it to take 6 to 7 years to get it to be done. He funded the development of the vaccine, which was available in December of 2020, which was very effective. That's just an amazing accomplishment. When you will look at it, he also was able to get a bill passed called Right to Try, which if you have a terminal disease and there is no prospect for your recovery, you should be allowed to try any medicines you want, whether they're FDA approved or not. He was able to get that passed with a handful of Democratic votes on the House floor to get that transparency done, and that was amazing. During his first term, inflation was well below 2% for the whole year. That's to juxtapose to Biden, which was much, much higher. If you look at him, we became energy independent in his first years in office. We were totally energy independent. And the one I like to do most of all, although it was not really implemented fully, was transparency, medical transparency. When you look at the healthcare industry, it's 20% of GDP. U.S. life expectancy relative to the OECD has been declining dramatically. U.S. costs of healthcare relative to the OECD has been expanding dramatically. I mean, this is what I call le croix de santé, which is the cross of health. And we've been on the backside of that cross of health, suffering major reductions in life expectancy and increases in costs. So I would expect in the next one, he'll be able to do it really well. And lastly, you know, when you look at a president, I believe it's economics. Good economics leads to a strong economy, which leads to a major deterrence to wars. And during his first 4 years in office, there were no wars the U.S. was fighting in the world. He was getting out of Afghanistan correctly. We had no wars during that period. No wars started during that period. So that's the background of his first term in office. The second term in office, by the way, I'm sorry, I missed one in the first term. What was trade? I know everyone talks about him being the tariff man and all of that, and I'm going to cover that in a second. But let me just say that there were 5 major trade deals done in the first term. The one was USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada deal, which was a major improvement in free trade, a lowering of tariff and non-tariff and quotas with the North American Free Trade Agreement, and it works out very, very well. We also had a free trade agreement with Japan, which lowered tariffs. He was reducing tariffs, not increasing them. We had one with South Korea, which also was another reduction in tariffs, and one with Brazil, and one with, I believe, Bolivia as well. So all of those were major trade agreements that all of them resulted in freer trade, not more controlled trade. So that was his first term. The difference in his second term is he's coming loaded for bear. Uh, you know, 3 wars were initiated during the Biden administration, the Gaza war, the Ukraine war, and I would argue the Houthis sending missiles to on U.S. ships in the Red Sea. All of those happened there. I think what you're going to see in this second administration is a cessation of all of those wars. I think already the Houthis have agreed not to send any more missiles at the U.S. ships in the Red Sea. I think that's already done. They're worried about retribution. I think that he will be going to Moscow or to Beijing to talk with Xi and with Putin to get the Ukraine war stopped. I think the Gaza war is, I think, well on its way towards closure as we speak. So I think you're going to see a much more peaceful 4 years now. With regard to spending, I think Doge initially with Vivek Ramaswamy, who has currently left the Doge committee, but with Elon Musk, I think you're going to see a major effort to reduce government spending in the U.S., and that will be incredibly good. On the healthcare side, I think you're going to also see, please forgive me, I just came over a cold, and I'm on the last days of my flu, so forgive me for coughing, but I think you're going to see a major reform of healthcare industry, not only with Bobby Kennedy Jr., but also with transparency, not only in posting prices, transactions prices, but also all the information we have on the efficacy of drugs and healthcare providers and healthcare outcomes, which is, I think, going to be an amazing improvement in the U.S. economy. That, I think, is wonderful. I think we're going to also see some major improvements on taxes. I think you're going to see the taxes on tips and the taxes on overtime and deduction of more interest on car loans. All of those are going to be done. I think one of the ones which is really important as well is not to tax additional taxes on Americans working abroad when they're in other markets competing with foreigners in those markets, not to have them have to pay the American taxes, but so they can compete in there with the taxes of the region that they're involved in. I think that's all terrific. And I think when you look at today, what's going to happen in policies is there's going to be what he calls drill, baby, drill. And that really means that you're going to see a huge increase in energy production in the U.S. It'll take a little bit of time to come in, but you'll see the pipelines opening, the drilling opening, and you'll see a lot of areas where drilling can occur will be made open to drilling. So all of that, I believe, is going to happen in the near term. But I want to talk about trade. And trade is the one that really scares people to death, and understandably so. We as academics have always talked about free trade being the only good solution, that there are no winners in trade wars and all of that. And what we focused on is 2 aspects of trade. This is the academic community, and both of these aspects of trade are completely correct. Number one is just on the trade itself, is there are some products we produce more efficiently than foreigners do. And there are some products that foreigners produce more efficiently and effectively than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make more efficiently than they do in exchange for those products they make more efficiently than we do. That's called the gains from trade, comparative advantage, win-win economics. David Ricardo, I don't care what you want to call it. It is the classic David Ricardo gains from trade. We make some things better than they do. Minnesota makes icicles better than Costa Rica does. Costa Rica grows bananas better than Minnesota does. Costa Rica should send bananas to Minnesota. Minnesota should send ice to Costa Rica. There you go. You've got the gains from trade right there. That's one aspect, and that's called comparative advantage or the Ricardian gains from trade. There's another huge aspect of the gains from trade as well, which is also called the Alexander gains from trade. If you take a machine, let's say a machine in Hokkaido, Japan, that is underperforming, it's losing money. If you take that machine and bring it down to Tokyo Harbor, you load it on a ship, you send that machine over to San Francisco, you offload that machine in San Francisco, you take it up to Denver, Colorado, and put it in a factory. And if that machine now is making a lot of profits, this is a huge win for the world. The machine goes from making big losses to big profits. In there, that's a gain, a win-win. But it's also, it's a Japanese export and a Japanese trade deficit, and it's a U.S. import and a U.S. trade deficit. And it's also a U.S. capital surplus and a Japanese capital deficit. The movement of capital or trade deficits and trade surpluses, the movement of capital across national boundaries has been an enormous source of economic growth for the world. Saving countries run trade surpluses and investing countries run trade deficits. And that way capital gets allocated on the world scene. From 1640 until about 1870, U.S. ran trade deficits virtually every single year during that whole period. It is amazing how those deficits were capital infusions into the U.S. economy from Europe, primarily from Holland and from Britain. And those capital surpluses in the U.S., our trade deficits, was able to combine with our natural resources and our labor to create the preeminent economic country on the planet Earth, all through Alexander trade deficits and trade surpluses or capital surplus and capital deficit. These two aspects of trade are really hugely, hugely beneficial to all countries included. Saving countries make higher returns on their savings, and capital and trade deficit countries use the capital to make higher productivity growth. It's just a win-win. And then you also have the comparative advantage. Looking at both of these, it is very, very true that free trade is the standard. It's the gold standard for economics. But that's just looking at academic economics. Free trade also has a different aspect, and I'm going to talk to you about this one for just a second, and you will see how this works in the real world in the political economy. And imagine we have only two countries in the world, the U.S. and Puerto Rico. The U.S. is 99% of the world, and Puerto Rico is 1% of the world. That's it. Only those two countries. It is true that all Puerto Rican exports to the U.S. are U.S. imports from Puerto Rico, and all U.S. exports to Puerto Rico are exports from the U.S. and imports to Puerto Rico. And let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, that these two countries trade and have a balance. And both of these countries have the same gains from trade. And they really do. Puerto Ricans export tropical products to the U.S., and the U.S. exports industrial manufacturing products to Puerto Rico. And they both have the same gains from trade. But not only do both countries have the same gains from trade, but because Puerto Rico is so much smaller than the United States, the gains from trade in Puerto Rico are disproportionately larger. The gains from trade in Puerto Rico on a per capita basis are 99 times greater than the gains from trade are in the United States on a per capita basis. So when you look at trade wars have no winners. That's very true. But also, the losers in trade wars don't lose the same amount either. If you looked at a trade war between the U.S. and Puerto Rico gets hammered, and the U.S. suffers much less damage to the overall economy than does Puerto Rico on a per capita basis. It's very clear. So when you look at this, trade is also an enormously effective tool for leveraging a country's power and getting what they want on a global scale. And Trump is the master of negotiations, is the master of international leverage use. I don't know if any of you saw what happened with Colombia the other day, but he was trying to fly in a plane in with all the illegal aliens, flying them back to Colombia. Colombia said, nope, nope, we won't take them. We won't take them. We won't let you land here. Trump, in 10 seconds, put on a 25% tariff on all Colombian exports to the United States, and it was going to bounce next week to 50%. Not only that, all visas, passports, and uses of the U.S. For Colombians was revoked instantaneously within, I think it was 45 minutes. Colombia rescinded on all of its things, and the U.S. was able to land in Colombia and was able to put the deportees back in Colombia with no tariffs, no quotas, nothing done. It was just the threat of tariffs was an enormously powerful negotiation tool. I'm going to tell you that his ability to leverage free trade and to leverage our markets with Mexico will result in enormous benefits for the U.S., will result in enormous benefits for the U.S. and Canada. It will also result in all very good leveraging of power and position with regard to the U.S. and Russia, with regard to the war in Ukraine. There is a lot more to free trade than just no tariffs, no barriers, rollover. If you look at the countries of the world today, the U.S. is probably the single freest trade large country in the world. And we have been, knowing that Japan and some of these other countries have enormous restrictive and protective measures. And I think Trump is going to be able to do in his second term what he did in his first term, is to be able to threaten tariffs, threaten quotas, threaten the elimination of access of countries to the U.S. market, and is going to be able to get very good free trade relations with these countries there. And I'm predicting that that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think it's damn good economics. I think it's very much more international than it is economic, but it really works, and it works very much to the benefit of the U.S. and to our economy. And when you look at this, leveraging international trade and being able to secure benefits that accrue to the Americans are very much like the gains from trade, whether they be the Ricardian gains from trade or the Alexander capital surplus deficit gains from trade. So I am looking forward to a very major change in U.S. policy, especially on trade policy, where Trump relies on threatening trade restrictions without actually imposing them. And now, obviously, if these countries don't go along with it, he's going to have to live up to his threats. But I think the living up to the threats will be greatly reduced, and that his threats will be enough to really get us really phenomenal trade benefits on the global scene. There are two economic principles I want to talk about here that will be very apropos to this coming administration, even though we've only been in it for 2 weeks or so, maybe even not 2 weeks. The first is cutting government spending. We call that, most economists call that stimulus spending. Let me tell you, it's the furthest thing from stimulus in the world. This government spending that had been going on throughout the Biden administration, the stimulus spending was really huge amounts of transfer payments to people in the economy. Now, the logic underlying the transfer payments is the people receiving the transfers would spend the money, and this would increase output, employment, and production there. But I want to talk about these transfers in terms of the transfer theorem. Now, the transfer theorem, this is a math theorem. It's not opinion. It applies equally as well to Harvard professors as it to undergraduates at Yale, as it does to postdocs at MTSU. It's math. It's economics. It's not ideological. It's not opinion. This is strictly math theorem. A transfer occurs whenever you take resources from one group and give it to another group. You can take it from young people and give it to old people, which is what occurs in Social Security. You can take it from fat people to skinny people. You can take it to short people to tall people. You can take it to black people to white people, male to female. You can take it to all these different groups. But the most usual way we describe it is we think of it in terms of income categories. And you'll recognize this. Basically, almost all of our government programs have needs tests, means tests, and incomes tests. We have a tax system that has a highly progressive tax system. This is, we take from those who have a little bit more, and we give to all of those who have a little bit less. And let me, if I can, describe and prove the theorem to you using that model. And the model is we take from those who have a little bit more and we give it to those who have a little bit less. The logic being that by taking those from those who have a little bit more, they can live with a little less because they're rich. And by giving to those who have a little bit less, they desperately need the money because they're poor and they're better off, and the rich are a little worse off, and it's worth the transfer occurring. Well, now let me do this with you verbally, but mathematically. Whenever you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they will produce a little bit less. Whenever you give to those who have a little bit less, you provide them with an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will produce a little bit less. By taking from those who have a little bit more, they lose their incentive to produce and they produce a little bit less. And by giving to those who have a little bit less, you reduce their incentives to produce as well, and they too will produce a little bit less. The math proof here is really simple. Whenever you redistribute income, whenever you transfer resources from one group to another, whenever you do it, it's mathematical. You always reduce total income, period. To think of it intuitively, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, don't be surprised if you got less people working. That is the transfer, pure and simple. And it's math, it's not political, it's purely math. Whenever you transfer resources, output always declines, period. Now, the lemma from this theorem is pretty cool. And let me just go through it. I'm not going to prove it verbally to you, but let me just describe it to you because it's way cool. The more you redistribute income, the larger the transfers are, the greater will be the reduction in total production, period. I think you can see this, but let me just say, the more you transfer, the less output will be. The less you transfer, the more output will be. That's the lemma from the theorem. The limit function from this theorem, which is beautiful, and I just love it beyond belief. I love this limit function. And let me, if I can, just describe it. God, I wish Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were here with me today so I could explain it to them and they could understand. If you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone came out exactly the same, if you were able to do that, if you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone came out exactly the same, the theorem states there will be no income whatsoever, period. Now, let me prove it to you if I can. In order to redistribute income in such a way that everyone comes out exactly the same, what you would have to do is you'd have to tax everyone who makes above the average income 100% of the excess. And you'd have to subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. And only in this way can you guarantee that everyone will come out the same, exactly the same after tax. All right? You'd have to tax everyone above the average income 100% of the excess and subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, and then and only then will you. Well, now, if you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess and actually subsidize everyone below the average income, I will stipulate, counselor, everyone will come out equally at zero income. This is the one thing. If you look at what's going on with Doge and Elon Musk and the cutting of spending and the waste and fraud and cutting back some of these absolutely ridiculous transfer payments, I think this is going to be an enormously powerful engine of growth for this next administration. I think it'll take them a lot longer to get to the cutting government spending, but this will be an enormous source of growth for the U.S. economy. There's one other thing I want to talk about with regard to this next administration, the next 4 years, and that has to do with a book I wrote with Dr. Brian Dimitrovic and Dr. Gene Sinkfield, which is called Taxes Have Consequences, which is the history of the U.S. income tax from 1913 to the present. What we do is we start in 1913, the U.S. instituted a progressive income tax. It was for 2 months, November and December. The highest tax rate at that time was 7%. The total number of people who were required to file for income taxes was 358,000 people. That's out of an adult population of 62 million people back then. Less than half of 1% were even required to file income taxes. And then the rate went only up to 7%. That scale stayed the same for 3 years, 13, 14, and 15. And then by the time we got to 1917, 18, the rate popped up to 77%. We went from 358,000 filers to 6.4 million filers, and so on. Sort of the election of 1920 was on taking taxes back to their pre-war level. The Democrats really wanted to keep the rates high. The Republicans under Harding and Coolidge wanted to go low. The election of 1920 put the Republicans in. They cut taxes there. 1919, the tax rate was 73%. They took it from 73 in 19, 20, and 21, and it dropped down to 25. This was the period of the roaring 20s. Revenues poured in. Well, we have a whole history of tax movements all over the place. And let me just give you the summary of the results of looking at each and every individual tax return for the last 110 years. And we have every single tax return. And I'm talking here just about raising taxes on the top 1% of income earners. Every single time we've raised the highest tax rate on the top 1% of income earners, three things have happened. Number one, the economy has underperformed. The economy underperformed. Number two, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners went down. And number three, the poor, the people on the lowest echelon of the economic ladder, were damaged beyond repair. Those three things happened every time we raised taxes on the rich. Symmetrically, every time we have cut tax rates on the rich, the economy has outperformed. Tax revenues from the rich have gone up, not down. And every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, the poor have benefited enormously from the economic growth and higher employment and higher wages for the poor. That's the other thing that's going to be done in this next administration. I think you're going to see them understanding marginal tax rates. I think you're going to see Trump trying to cut the corporate rate from 21% to 15%. I think you're going to see him try to reform the income tax by cutting rates lower and making it more. I think you're going to see a major reduction in IRS employees. I think he's also already put a freeze on all IRS employees, and now he's going to try to get them to move to the border. I think you're going to see one of the most consequential administrations in U.S. history in the next 4 years. I think you're going to see probably the best single. Now, again, remember, I'm only talking from tax terms, on economic terms, that you'll see the single best administration in U.S. history in the second term of an administration. I think he's going to be able to get his policies through, because if you look at the consequences from the election, I look at them in terms of the 7 positions of political power and what the election's results were. Now, the 7 positions of political power are: number 1, the presidency. That's number 1. 2, the most exclusive club in America, the Senate. Number 3, the People's House. That's the House of Representatives. Number 4 is the Fed. Number 5 is the Supreme Court. Number 6 are governors, the collection of governors in the United States. And number 7 is all the legislatures. If you look at this administration, one of the most amazing alignments of the political powers has occurred. It has not occurred in ages and ages and ages. The Republicans took over the presidency, and they not only won the popular vote, they won the electoral college vote. They won all the swing states. Trump did. That is one position of political power literally controlled 100% by Donald Trump. And he is involved in every one of those decisions in every single cabinet. Number 2, the Senate. Before the election, the Republicans had 49 senators. The Democrats had 51. That's now flipped. The Republicans now have 53 senators. The Democrats have 47. the Republicans have a formative hold on the U.S. Senate, controlling the second position of political power. The House, it's a closer call, but again, the Republicans do have control of the House, and that is, again, all three major legislative branches of government, House, Senate, and presidency, are all under the control of Republicans. Now, the one that is not under the control of Republicans is the Fed. Jerome Powell is not. He was appointed by Biden. He was initially appointed by Trump. That's true, but he is not a Trumpy. He is not on the Trump bandwagon and Trump train. And his term comes up in about a year, and he will be replaced by Trump's Federal Reserve pick on the Fed, and that will then be a Republican pick. But right now, you have the only thing that's not controlled by the Republicans is the Fed. If you look at the Supreme Court, there are 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. 6 have been appointed by the Trump Reagan group and Bush, and they've been appointed by Republicans. And the Trump group has complete control of the U.S. Supreme Court. And those decisions will be very, very important. For example, in the first term, the Supreme Court made a huge difference on economics by ruling that government agencies do not have the right to act restrictions if they have not been authorized by Congress. You know, the idea that regulations and restrictions and requirements have to be authorized by Congress is a decision that the Supreme Court made, and that rolled back, the Chevron decision rolled back a lot of those regulations, which was a major stimulus to growth in that administration. And I think you're going to see it happening going forward as well. The sixth position of political power are the governors. The governors are primarily Republican. I think the Republicans have a very large majority of governorships, and they have a large majority of the state legislators. So of the 7 positions of political power, the Republicans have control of 6 of those 7 positions. The Democrats have control of the Fed, but that won't last long. So you've got a situation now where this administration can use enormous leverage to get policies through and through quickly. In some cases, through executive orders, through resolution, without having passed the law. But they can do it. I think you're going to see it done. And I am extraordinarily excited about the next 4 years on the U.S. economy because of supply-side economics being implemented in a very effective way, both here at home and internationally. And with that, I'm going to stop and throw it open to questions. Bill, I went too long, and I apologize. I wanted to cover so much. But thank you for having me on this call. I'm open for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know that Dr. Laffer, your time is very valuable. So there were a number of questions that came in privately. I'll be happy to share some of those with you. But I did want to let everyone in the chat know at one point, Dr. Laffer has shared with us that he has his book available, and he has a few signed copies for my financial coach clients that he is going to be personally putting out there. So if there is anyone in our audience who is currently working with my financial coach, please reach out to your coach to let them know that you have some interest in that. And we are excited to, of course, get that copy over to you. And
duly inscribed.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So, first question for you, Dr. Laffer. You shared quite a bit with us about economics and what you expect coming into the Trump term. But just thinking about 2025, 2024, there was quite a lot of movement in the stock market, quite a lot of things. Now, you're not a investment firm person necessarily, but just thinking about 2025, what do you think about the immediate prospects for growth and stability in the U.S. economy?
Yeah, let me just say that in 2025, when you look at some of these bills that are going through and how long they take,
Sure.
There will be an anticipatory effect on these. For example, in his first term, Reagan cut taxes but phased them in. If you know there are going to be tax cuts next year and not this year, what do you do this year? You defer all the income you possibly can. So my view is when I look at this world, an improving economy is very different from an improved economy. And there are dynamic effects that will affect the first year. I would expect the effects on the first year to be far less than they will be on 2026, 2027, 2028 going on. All right. I really think there'll be some lags in some of these policies. I mean, especially if, let's say, we put through a new corporate tax. He had the one big, beautiful bill that he wants, and he gets it passed. And then you know they're going to cut the corporate rate next year. You'll defer some of your income for that year, and you'll accelerate some of your costs this year. And there may be some deleterious effects right away. And also, I don't know what's going to happen in the death tax. I mean, death tax expires. The benefits of the very low death tax expires at the end of this year if we don't get the bill passed. So therefore, if you're going to kill yourself, you'll want to kill yourself this year rather than I'm just joking. But there are a lot of temporal shifts in people's incomes that can occur. So I am less enthusiastic about the economy this year than I am about 2026. But I do think this year is going to be quite a sizable economy growth. It's not going to be anything like 81, 82, which was disastrous. But I do think it's going to be less than 26. And I think Trump's going to go into the elections, the midterm elections in 26, with a very, very strong economy.
Absolutely. So thinking about, one of the main concerns for whether it's the electorate or the economy in general, there's been a lot of talk about inflation versus rate cuts and things of that nature. Do you see any significant changes in the coming years, whether it's 25, 26? Of course, you're not Jerome Powell, but just kind of curiously, as an economist, where do you forecast inflation as well as these interest rates?
I think inflation will be somewhat less. It will stay somewhat less than it had been under Biden. I think replacing Powell is very important for getting inflation under control in Poe. But I think the transfer payment reduction this year, cutting off the welfare receipts and all this sort of stuff is very good for getting people back to work. If the economy grows substantially, if you have a bumper crop in apples, the price of apples drops. If you have a bumper crop in the production of goods and services, believe me, the price of goods and services will drop. So anything that stimulates the economy to grow faster, I think will reduce inflation. I think the Fed's policies on interest rates are totally misguided. They should not be looking at interest rates. They should be looking at what's happening to the balance sheet, not what's going on in interest rates. And they should not use interest rates as their guide as to how to manipulate the balance sheet. I think they should use spot commodity prices to be looking at spot commodity prices as to whether they buy bonds or sell bonds in the open market, not looking at the inflation numbers on the aggregate. But that's me. So I think we're going to have restrained inflation this year, but no major control over it until Powell is replaced. But then you're going to see the Trump period be one of very stable prices going forward.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you are suggesting that inflation will not necessarily hockey stick up, but will not go back to historical averages of the 2% Fed target, but also going into the interest rates. Do you feel that they are also going to be in line, or do you feel we will get more rate cuts for 2025 and 26?
I think until the economy starts recovering substantially, I think you'll see the rate cuts. They will look at inflation and they will look at the economy mistakenly, and they will base their policies on that. And I think just what we've seen in the last 7 years is what we're going to see going forward, which is mistaken use of rates as opposed to looking at spot commodity prices and doing the buying and selling of the balance sheet items correctly that way. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what I think. And so therefore, I think you can expect a couple of rate cuts this year, judging by Powell's, uh, I think, incorrect policy model. And if the economy starts heating up, I think they'll raise interest rates if they do that. And that would be a clear mistake to do. They should follow interest rates, Impo. Whatever markets decide the interest rate should be, the Fed should set its discount rate 1/4 of a point above the market rate of interest for the 90-day T-bill. That's what they should do. And just have it go. So it's a little bit more expensive to borrow from the Fed than it is to borrow from the market. And then if spot commodity prices are rising rapidly, they should then be selling bonds in the open market and taking money out of the system, reducing the Fed's balance sheet. If spot commodity prices are falling relative to what they should be doing, I think they should be buying bonds in the open market and then increasing the Fed's balance sheet to stabilize spot commodity prices over the long period. And that's just exactly what Volcker did. By doing that, you can bring down the whole level of inflation. And once you bring down inflation, then interest rates reflect exclusively the real return on U.S. assets. The real interest rate, what they call the TIPS yield, is the real return on a unit of capital. And that we need to have as high as possible. That's when growth occurs. In the Kennedy 60s, the Reagan period was very high TIPS yield. I mean, that's what you need to have, high interest rates, because real returns are high and low inflation is very low. That's what you want to have. And until the Fed operates correctly, that's not what you're going to have. They're going to make the mistake of trying to do interest rates based upon their perception of what causes inflation. And they think growth causes inflation. It doesn't. Growth solves inflation. Producing more goods reduces inflation. It doesn't increase inflation. Sorry, Jerome, but you're wrong on that.
So I think you touched a lot during your presentation on trade deficits, and just going into that point, there's certainly a lot of talk about tariffs and perhaps call it trade disputes. What do you foresee in the coming administration in terms of what the trade deficits will look like then from now to the end of the Trump administration?
I don't think the trade deficits are going to change all that much, to be honest with you. If anything, if the U.S. becomes a growth country again, foreign capital will want to move into the U.S., which means a larger trade deficit for us. Now, there are some squanderous spending that has been going on that will, by stopping it, it will reduce trade deficits. Ending wars and abroad and military, exports and all of that will be affected. But I think the key element of trade is Trump's incredible ability to negotiate using the threat of access to U.S. markets. That, to me, is, I think, the one huge new element in public policy. What he did with Colombia is just emblematic of Donald Trump. What he's going to do with Panama. Panama can't afford a trade war with the U.S. I was down in Suriname not 3 weeks ago. Then the Chinese are building all these facilities down there and all that. And they don't know what to do. They've made a mistake of way over borrowing, and now they're looking to the Chinese, and now they're begging the IMF to help bail them out and stuff. Trump can do a lot in these countries to stabilize and harmonize the political situation around the world. What's going on in Greenland, all of that. We need to secure our hemisphere from the standpoint of the security for American citizens. And Trump is extraordinarily capable of using trade as a tool to negotiate treaties with other countries, including China, including Russia, including Iran, including North Korea, to get wars way down, to get concessions from the U.S. I would be very surprised in the same logic that Trump doesn't use aid to, let's say, California to get negotiations on, on ID for voting, not only ID for voting, but also for all sorts of other issues there. I mean, why is it that California doesn't have to show official ID to be able to vote? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, and nor does it to a lot of people. I don't know about it, but it just doesn't. When you look at, like, let's say, passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extension, tying that into the big, beautiful, the aid to California into that big, beautiful bill. He knows how to do this. He knows how to get the votes, and he knows how to make the phone calls to bring the people on board. So I would be very surprised if I didn't see him doing what he does best, which is negotiation. And I think that's what he's going to do. And just from my standpoint, I think that's what he should do. I'm very pleased with the way Trump has handled his leverage and his skill at marketing and skill at getting votes through. I think he's done a phenomenal. How did he get Pete Hegseth affirmed for the Secretary of Defense? But he did. And it's just amazing. Now, that's the guy he wanted, and he got him. And I think Trump is very effective at using negotiation techniques to get things he wants. And I think he knows how to do it, and I think he will do it. And I think the goals and objectives he's using for this are the right ones.
Well, Dr. Laffer, we appreciate your time today. And for all of our listeners who had questions that you had put in the chat, we do apologize if we were not able to get to them right away. But Dr. Laffer, we appreciate your time. I think that might be your team letting you know that you are at time. So
they always yell at me. They scream at me. They treat me badly. It's elder abuse, Impo. It's elder abuse. And I hate it. But let me just say, Impo, if you have those questions and you have them from the people there, if you've got them on email, send them to Nick Drinkwater if you can.
Absolutely.
And I'll try to answer those questions and send them back. And so you guys can send them back to the people who asked them. And if I can, I'd be glad to. If it's a really elaborate question, I can't. But if it's not too elaborate, I'd be glad to do it in there, okay? And just remind them, if they want an autographed copy with a little inscription of the book, Taxes Have Consequences, I'm here for it. If you want it, I'll sign it and have it sent to you.
Absolutely. We appreciate it, and we want to thank everyone for joining us again today. And we hope to have you soon as we continue our webinar series. And we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully some point this week, Dr. Laffer.
I'd love to, Impo. You look a lot better, by the way, without that beard and stuff. You look a lot better. By the way, does everyone know you're engaged?
Hopefully they do, but now they do.
And now they do. You can understand why this guy's trying to find a pretty girl to get married to. He cleans up pretty nice, doesn't he, everyone? Talk to you all later.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Laffer.
Thank you all once again so much for joining us for today's webinar.